So, Chris, if you hadn't learnt to speak Spanish, what language would you have chosen?
You stole my one. That was
Oh,
the
yeah.
one. Oh, yeah, I literally just thought of that. Yeah. So, hello, and welcome everybody. We're back again another week with the Ingles Britannical podcast. I'm Chris, and I'm here with my co-host Lewis. Lewis, how are you doing?
I'm not bad. I just mentioned to you that I've just had lunch and I had a whole baguette. Yes, you're probably thinking, Lewis, you fat beep. And yes, I do have a talent, and my talent is that I have a big appetite and I can eat a lot. But I think I'm paying the price now, which is why I've got myself my usual crusty espresso to hopefully perk me up and get me ready for this podcast. But how about you? How's life?
Yeah, all good. It's funny because before we started recording, we were having a quick chit chat, and yeah, you said you ate a baguette, and even I was like, wait, a full baguette or a half of a baguette? It's like, no, a full baguette. So that's impressive. Yeah. But no, I'm doing well. I'm back in Gijón now, back in my flat. So I'm a bit more on the ball this week, a bit more back into my routine. I don't have a shaky camera. My battery, my phone is charged to 100%. So yeah, I'm really, really happy to be home, to be honest. It's weird, but this is home. I'm English, but this is home. Even though I grew up in the UK, this feels like home to me. I don't know if you have that feeling about Belgium, because obviously it's not been as long.
I mean, not exactly, but sometimes a little bit. So, for example, if I'm back home for a few weeks, then when I get back to my flat in particular, because it's my routine, it feels nice at the beginning because, like, okay, I have my privacy, I have my safe space.
Yeah.
Of course, there are things I like about Brussels and things that I'm not so keen on. So, of course, as with everything, there are pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. But it feels a little bit like home, but I'd say more of a temporary home. So,
Yeah.
that being said, Chris, do you think you'll end up living in Gijón for the long, long term?
Probably not. No, I love Spain, but and I do love Gijón, but no, I think I've still got some cities left to explore. Obviously, some cities I want to go for a weekend, like a getaway, una escapada, a getaway for a weekend. But there are still a couple of cities I would like to live in for a year or a couple of years to really soak up the environment, the phrasal verb, soak up the culture, the new city, the new customs and things like that. Well, actually, I mean, one of the questions in today's episode is related to this because we're going to talk about the conditionals. But before we start with the conditionals, Lewis, have there been any good videos you've taught on Instagram recently that you would like to mention?
Absolutely, and thanks for asking. And actually, last week, I think it was last Tuesday, I recorded a big batch of videos, which I try to do every few weeks. And I ended up recording like 18 or 20 videos. And I
Wow.
think the first video that I posted of this new batch of videos was the phrase, ¿Cómo se dice? Mira quién habla en inglés. And I was thinking, look who speaks. Nah, that sounds weird. So I offered some alternative ways of saying, mira quién habla. And the most common one is, "Psst, look who's talking. Look who's talking," which is when you're being a bit sarcastic or ironic about someone being slightly hypocritical. But it's not only look who's talking, you could also say, huh, you're one to talk. Or even, that's rich coming from you. So that was
Yeah.
a lovely phrase. Mira quien habla. You could say, look who's talking. That's rich coming from you. Or you're one to talk. So a lovely phrase that you can try to memorize and use the next time you have a chat and you have this moment where you're like, Really? Seriously?
Yeah.
Look who's talking.
I like that. That's rich coming from you. I've also, I don't know if you've heard it as well, but I've heard it shortened. Just, oh, that's rich. Or even just, that's rich, mate. Just instead of coming from you, just, mate, that's rich, mate. Just, yeah, that's rich coming from you. That's rich, mate. Yeah.
Mate applies for so many things. If
Yeah.
you want to sound more British or Aussie as well, the word mate, we use it over and over
Yeah.
again. Loads. But tell me about you. Has there been an interesting, cool phrase that you've taught on Instagram recently?
Well, talking about these kind of cool words which can be used for many different uses, like mate, I actually taught que significa folks. Folks, folks. If anybody is wondering, yes, from the Warner Brothers. That's all, folks. So, lots of people are wondering, my students, what does this mean? It could mean people in general. Excuse me, sorry. For example, Warner Brothers, that's all, folks. Eso es todo, gente. Or ya acabamos, gente. Like, yeah, ya está, gente, folks. But I think maybe more common to use it as my parents, my folks came to visit me, or I'm having dinner with my folks, my parents. One of my comments on Instagram asked me, could I use it in plural? In singular, sorry. And I thought that was a great question. When we talk about parents, no, you can't say one folk or my dad folk, no. But as people, yes, we can say they're good folk. They're good folk, like they're good people. It's a buena gente, they're good folk. But no, when it's talking about your parents, one folk, no, it would be my folks, both of them.
Exactly. It sounds weird. Or also, you could say it sounds a bit funny. And when I
Yeah.
say funny here, I'm not saying gracioso. I'm not saying divertido. I'm saying like strange. Because the adjective funny in English has a few different meanings. And one of them, which I feel like maybe we touched on last week or the week before, was a way of saying strange. So if something smells funny, it smells strange. If it sounds funny, it sounds strange. Or maybe it looks funny and it looks strange. So I was trying to remember, like, did we touch on that last week? I think we did, right?
It was the dad joke. The two cannibals are eating a clown, and one says the other, does this taste funny to you? So yeah, it was the dad joke. We were saying taste funny, sabe raro, or taste weird, strange.
Exactly. Now, I noticed something that I don't know if you want to address this or not. And by the way, address, of course, as a noun, it means dirección. My address is 10 Smith Street, for example. But address as a verb actually means like to deal with or to manage almost or to speak about something. In Spanish, it's kind of like abordar un tema. So I don't know if you want to address the fact that it sounded like you pronounced que significa, like que significa and not que significa, which is what you usually say. Have you changed your mind about this?
Yes and no. In the videos, no. But on this podcast, yes, to avoid talking about it every episode. But never mind, because you just talked about it. So it kind of just completely nullified the reason for doing it. Nullified, like made useless or made irrelevant. But yeah, now we're talking about it for another episode. But no, in the podcast, I've decided que significa. But in my videos on Instagram, no, que significa. It's my thing. It's my gimmick. My estratagem, I think in Spanish, my gimmick. So yeah, I'm sticking to that. Well, so talking about teaching, let's maybe start with the conditional. So Lewis, you were going to start with the main, maybe not the main conditional, but let's say the simplest, the first one we need to learn.
Exactly. So there are, of course, mixed conditionals where we can combine different conditionals. But let's start by going over the four most common ones, the four main ones. And that begins with zero, the zero conditional. And well, as Chris said, it's simple because to conjugate it, the structure is if plus subject plus present simple, then a comma, and then we have the subject and the present simple again. And we use this conditional to speak about facts, things that are always going to be the same. So it's usually something that's scientific, or basically, if one thing happens, another thing will happen. So if there is this cause, there will be this effect. For example, because examples always make everything clearer,
Yeah.
I would say if you heat water to 100 degrees, it boils. And similarly, I could say if you put water in the freezer, it freezes. If you take ice out of the freezer, it melts. So we often use the zero conditional to speak about things that will always happen. You have this thing that happens and this results. Of course, you can sometimes use it for like routine things, but not as much. For example, if I go for a run, I listen to music. Like in general, this is what I do when I go for a run. So that is the first conditional, the zero conditional, present and present, and it's used for scientific things and routines. Now, Chris, moving on to the first. Tell us about the first conditional.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the routine use in the zero because, in my opinion, the first conditional is very, very similar to that use of the zero. Not the scientific facts, that is the zero, 100% the zero conditional. But as you mentioned, the routines, if I go for a run, I listen to music. We could also use the first conditional, the present simple. If I go for a run, and then the future simple with will, I will listen to music. Now, the very slight nuance, the very small difference is with the I will listen to music, it means this one time. Not only this one time, again, it could be various times, which is why it's similar to routine with the zero. But I'm talking about this one time. So, a good example I always use with my students is if it rains, I will use an umbrella. Talking about today. Maybe tomorrow I won't. Maybe I will tomorrow. Maybe I won't. It's not important tomorrow. The important thing is today, if it rains, I will use an umbrella. But yeah, I don't know if you agree, but it's very similar to the zero in the context of routines. The only small difference is I'm talking about this one specific time, but it could also be other times. I'm just not referencing the other times.
Exactly. I think with this, of course, present simple and then future simple, you're speaking about the future and you're speaking about things that have a real possibility of happening. It's not unlikely. So here,
Exactly.
today it's cloudy. So if it rains, which it seems like it might
Yeah.
rain, I will stay at home or I will go out in a raincoat. Or maybe if it rains, I will go for a run in the rain and get wet.
That
Who knows?
sounds horrible. That sounds horrible. But then, so you mentioned, yes, these are realistic kind of possibilities or scenarios. Because if we talk about unrealistic scenarios or hypothetical scenarios, we use a different conditional, don't we?
You put it on a plate for me. You put
I
it
was,
on a plate for me.
you set it up for me, and then I set it back up for you. Yeah.
A nice phrase, by the way. I'll give you the Spanish translation of this. You put it on a plate for me. We could also say you put it on a silver platter for me, which is more similar to the Spanish version, which is me lo has puesto en bandeja. So you teed it up for me. You provided me with a wonderful assist. So this is the second conditional, which is probably the most common one, in particular with conversations, because as friends, if you're meeting up, you're gathered together, it's quite common to ask each other these second conditional questions. So the structure is if plus the past simple. Then in the second clause, we use would. Of course, would, could, might, they're also options, but usually we use would. So if it rained, which it doesn't look like it, it's sunny. I would stay at home. So now this is much less likely. It's more hypothetical. So it doesn't seem like this is going to happen, but if it did happen, hypothetically speaking, I would do that. Another
Perfect. I just
go.
one thing about the grammar that's a common mistake for my students is it's the would and then the base verb. A lot of my students, I would to buy. If I won the lottery, I would to buy, would eat, would do. So I think that's something important to mention as well. It's a very common mistake among my students. So maybe it's just my students, I don't know, but
No, no, I think it's a common mistake for many people. And if I'm ever teaching some very, very, let's say, some students with a low level or absolute beginners, a little tip is that when you're thinking and translating from Spanish, the ia is would. So, for example, compraría, I would buy. Iría, I would go. Jugaría, I would play. So, in case you have any students or any of you are struggling to understand and you don't really get when we use would, it's kind of simple because the suffix ia is the same as would in English. But let me just ask you a quick question and then I'll tee you up for the third question. Chris, if you didn't live in Gijón, where would you live?
oh, good question. So if I didn't live in Gijón, I would live in maybe Granada. Yeah, Granada. I've heard a lot of good things about Granada. I've never visited, but I've heard a lot of good things. Apparently, it's very hippie, and I consider myself quite hippie and laid back. So I think Granada would suit me quite well.
Perfect. I think it would be a good choice. I recommend visiting at least for sure, or I recommend you visit. Related to that, remember that when we use recommend, we don't say, I recommend you to. No, I recommend you visit or ing. I recommend visiting Granada. Granada. Anyway, on to the third conditional. Chris, tell us about this one because people often get a little bit confused with this last main conditional.
Yeah, I think the most confusing thing about it is the structure. The use is when we speak about regrets. That's the way I describe it to my students. It's regrets because we talk about the past and how we would like to hypothetically change it, but it's impossible. It's in the past, it's already happened. For example, if I hadn't studied journalism, I would have studied medicine. So this is me talking. No, that was just an example. Sorry, that's not like a real example.
Chris the doctor, we
Yeah, I
missed
saw
out.
your face like really surprised. No, that was
Right.
just medicine was the first thing that came to my head. But yeah, so these. Well, let me talk about the structure. Sorry. So yeah, if I hadn't studied journalism, so this is the past perfect. Obviously, I've used the past perfect negative. If I had not, if I hadn't studied journalism. And then the second clause, I would have studied. So the easiest way I explain this to my students, even if it's not technically the correct usage, is it's would and then present perfect. Even though that's not technically necessarily what we call that clause, that's how I explain it. Would and then present perfect. I would have studied. So it's the past perfect if I hadn't studied, and then the present perfect with would, I would have studied medicine. So very common for regrets. I don't know if you have any examples using the third conditional.
I mean, yeah. I've got quite a few, but let's say, for example, given that half an hour ago I had a whole baguette, and now I think I'm a bit too full, and I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have eaten so much. So if I hadn't eaten the full baguette, I would have been a normal human being and I would have had half of a baguette, like most people. But
Yeah.
another example, which I often tell, is that I think maybe I shouldn't have gone to university and I shouldn't have studied at university in England at all. So if I hadn't gone to uni, I wouldn't have met my fiance. But also, if I hadn't gone to uni, mixed conditional, I wouldn't have lots of student loan debts at the moment. So
Yeah.
just go over this mixed conditional because we've covered zero, the first, the second, and Chris has just gone over the third conditional for regrets. And the mixed conditionals is when you will start with one conditional and finish with another conditional. And often we mix the second and third one way or the other way round. So, as I said, if I hadn't gone to university, third conditional, I wouldn't have lots of student loan debt at the moment. So, here we have a combination between the third and the second, which is really common. But we could also start with the second and then have the third. So, for example, if I were a millionaire, I would have been to Barbados last week, for example.
Yeah, I always use it because this is for me the hardest conditional is this second mixed conditional where it's a state. If a state were different, like un estado, not a state of the United States, but like a physical or emotional or mental state. So I always use the example if I were Spanish in general, just not a specific moment. No, just in general, if I were Spanish, I would have learned Spanish as a native. So in the past, I would have done this because my general state is different. But that's definitely the hardest one. Yeah, if I were Spanish, I would have grown up in Spain.
Okay, fantastic. So I think we've covered all of the conditionals. Of course, in this conversation, we cannot go over absolutely everything. But what we're going to do and cover from this point is, well, we're going to ask each other some interesting conversations. And to get started, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go over some really common questions. Then maybe we will make up our own questions after that. So,
Yeah, as Lewis mentioned, the second conditionals are probably the most common in social conversations with friends because we're always dreaming about what we could do or what we would do. So I think we decided to focus on these second conditional questions. But as Lewis, as you just mentioned, maybe after the presentation, we can think of a couple more.
absolutely. Now, I'm going to ask you the first question. So, Chris, what would you do if you won the lottery? And there can be different types of lottery. Maybe you can win El Gordo in Spain, which isn't actually that much money when we think about winning the lottery, because I think after tax, it's like 300,000, which would be amazing, but you probably still have to keep working. So let's say around a million, 2 million. If you won 1 or 2 million euros, Chris, what would you do with the money?
Yes, they say after tax 1 million. After tax 1
Okay.
million, I would retire straight away. I would retire. And then I would pay a financial advisor. What I would do, I would basically say, how can I never work again? That's what I would do. Is like if I won the lottery, I would retire and then I would hire a financial expert who could basically tell me how to never work again. Yeah. Just very quickly, interestingly, even though I'm continuing the sentence, I'm still using would and could because it's still hypothetical. So this is something I tell my students. It's not just the second clause. If I won the lottery, I would retire. I continue in this hypothetical, and then I would do this, and I would do this, and I could do this. So yeah, that's what I would do. Lewis, what would you do if you won the lottery?
I mean, this might sound a little bit geeky, a little bit nerdy, but I don't think I'd quit work. I don't think I would stop working. My way of working would change. So I wouldn't teach as many classes as I teach nowadays. Of course, I love teaching, but I would prioritize free time a little bit more. I think I would continue to make this podcast and continue posting other videos, but I
You're
probably
going to be on your own if I win the lottery. Sorry, it's just you. Yeah.
yeah. So English Britannical podcast would become English Britannical Lewis podcast.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
But
but this would mean we both need to win the lottery, which again is very unlikely. So yeah.
like I like routine and I like having habits. So what I would do is that I would travel around quite a lot, continue working, but just a little bit. Of course, I would reduce my workload a lot. Like you, I would consult an expert so that I could put my money in assets that would be able to generate passive income for me, which is something that I'm quite interested in at the moment, whether that's stocks, ETFs, crypto, property, different assets that could generate income. Because to be honest, I don't really spend that much money anyway. I'm quite good at being a bit stingy, a bit tight-fisted, un poco
We say
tacaño,
frugal.
a bit
Frugal is
frugal.
a positive way to say it. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, I will admit I'm a little bit stingy. But yeah, I'd keep working, but I'd work a lot less. I would travel, I'd invest in things that could generate me more money, and well, I'd just go on fantastic holidays.
Yeah. And that's the main thing is travel. Like, yeah, the more free time you have, the more you can travel. So that's my objective. I love teaching, but yeah, if I have a choice of go to New York or teach some English classes, I'm really sorry, guys. And but yeah, I'm going to choose New York, I think. Yeah.
Honesty is the best policy. Now, let's move on to the next question. And this is a bit of a curveball. It's a little bit unexpected. Um, Chris, what would you do if there was a zombie apocalypse?
So there's one thing I would just like to mention about some grammar here. There might be some listeners thinking I've written this wrong. Actually, in the second conditional, we conjugate the verb to be to were. And yes, whoever is thinking that right now, you are correct. Grammatically, in the second conditional, what would you do if I were a millionaire, if I were Spanish? However, lots of people, myself included, just used was because it's the past simple of the verb to be. So it fits with the rule. And it just became so common that now it's grammatically accepted. Well, I've seen it in use of English, one of those, the most certifiable English grammar books. I think it's the most well known one. Would you agree, Lewis? The English in use, English grammar in use.
Yeah, I'd say so. It's the one that was written by like Raymond Murphy, maybe?
Yeah, yeah, give some credit there in case we get in any legal trouble. Yeah, yeah, I like it, clever.
Best
But
book
yeah,
ever.
oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, that's amazing. We love it. But yeah, so I remember reading in there that it says now was is accepted in the second conditional. So you can say either the conjugation were or the past simple was is correct. Obviously for I, because if it was, he, then it's going to be were, or yeah, if he were, or anyway. So what would I do if there was a zombie apocalypse? I would probably die, to be honest. But I would hole up, which is a great phrasal verb to mean fortify my flat. I would hole up in my flat and try to survive as long as possible because I think the panic on the streets would be the most dangerous thing. What would you do if there was a zombie apocalypse?
I mean, I'm just thinking of the film. Shaun of the Dead, which
Yeah.
is a classic kind of dark comedy adventure zombie apocalypse film. It's a great way to practice your British English listening skills. The main actor is Sean Penn, which I'm sure you will recognize.
No, sorry, Simon Pegg, but close.
Almost.
Yeah, almost. Sean Penn is the American actor, was like in his 60s. Yeah,
So
almost.
I take that back. I take that back. I
I have a
retract what
really,
I said.
I have a stupid memory for celebrity names. I'm very good at it I have a knack for remembering celebrity names. I don't know why.
So as I was saying, the main character is Simon
Yeah,
Pegg, and the film Shaun of the Dead is really interesting, and it characterizes British people perfectly, where there is a zombie apocalypse, and they just think, okay, let's go and make sure mom's okay, friends are okay, and then let's go to the pub and wait for everything to blow over. Basically, wait for the situation to pass, and what better place to do that than in a pub when you can have a
yeah,
pint? But whether I would actually do that, I'm not sure because I'm a bit of a chicken. I'm not very courageous. I'm not very brave, but I try and find some kind of weapon to be able to protect myself. And then I'd either go to the pub or I'd try and get as far away from society and humanity
yeah,
as possible and then just become a recluse far, far away from everybody and try to live off the land. But
yeah,
I would probably die as well. I would probably
yeah.
become a zombie just like you.
Yeah, we could roam around together teaching English as zombies somehow. I don't know. ¿Qué significa in inglés? Yeah.
¿Cómo se dice?
Yeah.
Okay, now moving on to the next one. This
Well, yeah. Why don't you start with this one, Lewis? So
okay.
this is obviously, I think, a very common question because we all love traveling. So, Lewis, if you could live anywhere in the world for a year, where would you go and why? Let's say it's all expenses paid. So the flight is paid, the accommodation is paid, the food is paid, everything.
Okay, and would I have to choose just one place to stay for the whole year?
Yes. Yeah, good question. Yes, only one place. Yeah. Let's say one city, but you can travel that country of that city. For example, London, you could also travel the UK.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Good. I like the question. Let me mull it over. Let me mull it over, which is a phrasal verb, which means like to consider and think about. So I'm mulling it over, and well, when I ask myself this question quite a lot, and when I think about a destination for my honeymoon next year, the country that seems to win is usually Colombia. And
Oh, okay.
I'm sure there's more than one Colombian watching this. So if you have any recommendations for your own country, let us know in the comments. But yeah, I have some amazing Colombian students. Everybody's really friendly. I know there are so many different landscapes in Colombia as well. I know that you can go to little tropical islands, you can go to volcanoes, you can go to the Amazon rainforest. Like it offers a little bit of everything, and I'm curious about it. And of course, I already speak Spanish, so I would be able to integrate quite easily. So, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer because there are so many places, so many cities and countries that I'd love to live in and travel to. But right now, top of my list is probably Colombia. But
Okay.
how about you? What country and city would you say?
Well, I mean, I hate creepy crawlies, but when you mentioned the Amazon, I immediately thought of creepy crawlies like spiders and cockroaches and bugs. So I'm going to go for the complete opposite and choose New York. Yeah, maybe I mean, I don't want to get in any trouble, so let's keep this very vague, but maybe not right now, maybe in a few years' time. Not today or any
Wait till
time
it
this
all
year.
blows over.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe just wait a few years for no specific reason in general, but maybe wait a few years. And then I would love to live in New York for a year. Yeah, I obviously Brighton is very close to London, so I've been to London so many times in my life, but I never had that experience of living in London. I've lived in Madrid and Mexico City and Beijing, which are very big capital cities, but I would love the experience of living in New York for 1 year, becoming a New Yorker. New York, where's my coffee? I don't do a very good American accent. Sorry, that was terrible. But yeah, so especially all expenses paid as well. I think I would take advantage of aprovechar. I would take advantage of the all expenses paid, and New York is the most expensive, so it's kind of a double win. Yeah, like I'm getting the most expensive place in the world for free for a year. So
Good argument. Good argument. Now, before we move on and wrap up this week's podcast with a little joke, of course, as always, I want you to think of a third conditional conversation question to ask me. And whilst you're thinking, I'm going to ask you a question with the third conditional as well, because as we mentioned, this is one of the conditionals that usually students can struggle with. So, Chris, if you hadn't learnt to speak Spanish, what language would you have chosen?
you stole my one. That was
Oh,
the
yeah.
one. Oh, yeah, I literally just thought of that. Yeah, I'll have to think of another one while I'm answering this question. So I think if I hadn't learned Spanish, I would have learned French. I started learning at school. I didn't do very well. We mentioned this in a previous podcast episode. I wasn't a very good student, especially in French. But I do have French friends now. As an adult, I made some really good friends who are French. We obviously communicate in Spanish, but if I hadn't learned Spanish, I would have learned French to be able to communicate with them in their language. And again, I think it's a very useful language. You know, in Canada, they speak French. In parts of Africa, they speak French. So yeah, I think French would be the one. Yeah, very difficult, but yeah.
Excellent. Now, your turn. Think of a question. Sorry for stealing the previous one.
No, no.
I'm sure you can come up with something.
So, okay, so I've got one. Obviously, a lot of our listeners know that we both like football. We're not necessarily fanatics, but we both like it. So, if you hadn't chosen to support Leeds, who would you have chosen to support?
Well, my dad is a Leeds fan, so I didn't really have much choice. That these things often happen if your father supports a team, you kind of inherit that team from him. So I support Leeds United as a result, but technically I'm from Bradford and not Leeds. So if I
Well, let me rephrase the question. If your dad hadn't forced Leeds upon you, which team would you have chosen?
I would like to go with uh my original, which is if I hadn't been forced to support Leeds United, I would have supported Bradford City, which is
Perfect.
a smaller team, which is right next to Leeds, because Leeds, the airport is called Leeds Bradford Airport, because it's kind of between the two. And technically, I'm from Bradford and not from Leeds. So I think I would have chosen to support Bradford. But in that case, my life would have been even more painful watching football because Leeds aren't great and have had a really tough time over the last 20 years. But for Bradford City, it's been even worse. So yeah, I would.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Brighton beat Bradford about 2 weeks ago, 6-0, 6-0, 6-0. So this would have been a much more interesting conversation if you were a Bradford City fan. This would have been a lot better, yeah.
Luckily, I'm not. Luckily, I'm not. But anyway, that's been interesting. I feel like people will have learned a lot about conditionals. And if you have any remaining questions related to conditionals, once again, let us know in the comments and tell us, what would you do if you won €1,000,000? How would you spend the money? But over to you, Chris, because as always, it is time to finish off with a joke.
Well, I thought today, I'm back in Spain, as I mentioned earlier. It's still very sunny, but it is getting colder. So that's how I got the idea for this joke. Again, not the idea. I didn't create the joke. Sorry, that this is how I connected the dots and remembered this joke, which I'm going to tell you, which is which is the coldest country in the world, or which country is the coldest in the world?
Russia, Greenland, I don't know.
No, Chile. Chile. So
Oh,
again, I hate doing the explanation, but unfortunately we're teachers, so let's just do it quickly. Chilly, spelt Chilly, is a great adjective in English to mean a little bit cold. I think in Spanish say fresquito. Yeah, es hace fresquito. Oh, it's a bit chilly. Maybe a jacket, maybe a hoodie, but you don't need a coat and a scarf and no, just maybe a hoodie or maybe a jacket. It's just a bit chilly.
yeah, I mean, saying that, I am a bit chilly today. Oh, a bit chilly, or you could also say a bit nippy, which is a more British colloquial way of saying it. Chilly,
Yeah.
cool, nippy. Whew. So on that note, I like the joke. It did actually make me laugh. I had to kind of hold back the laughter. I promise.
Okay, I'll choose to believe that. Thank you. Yeah.
But no, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for watching, listening, and hopefully having fun at the same time. We'll be back next week, as always, with a different topic. So, a pleasure. See you next time. Hasta luego. Y muchas gracias.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. See you all soon.
See you later. Bye bye.